Welcome to the Apartment Investor Show, where we help you get smart and invest smarter in multifamily real estate. I'm your host, JC Castillo, founder and managing principal of the Multifamily Property Group. And joining me as always is my good buddy, my co-host, also known as the godfather of lending, Mr. Paul Peebles, national underwriter for Old Capital Lending. Paulie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, JC, and very excited to have another great, worthwhile, and educational program. Tell us a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today, JC.
Well, absolutely, Paulie. You know, this is a great one for all you viewers out there. You definitely want to tune in. Today, we are going to talk about how to 1031 exchange, even when your partners want to cash out. And, you know, Paulie, this is important to me personally because I've been in a few situations where we've bought some apartment complexes together with some partners in an LLC. And a couple of the partners have, for whatever reason, wanted to cash out and not wanted to continue on and do a 1031 exchange, which has huge benefits. And so learning these tips and techniques to be able to still exchange without your partners having to go with you, that's super critical to really building up a really good tax deferred strategy. And so I'm excited today for what we're going to talk about and the guests that we have on today for that single reason alone, how you can 1031 exchange when your partners still want to cash out. So Paulie, why don't I let you introduce today's guest?
So I've known Craig Brown for a number of years, and he has been an instrumental success for a lot of investors throughout the nation. So Craig works and runs a company called IPX 1031. IPX 1031 is a division of a large title company. And so he is on the cutting edge about what's going on with tax deferral, with exchanges. And so he's a smart guy. We had him featured at the Old Capital Multifamily Conference this year. He spoke in front of about 700 people, and talked a little bit about how folks can use the 1031 exchange to really kind of build your net worth, build your wealth, and go to the next level. So Craig is a graduate of the great Baylor University, did his undergrad and graduate his law degree from Baylor. And so he is an attorney, and he's going to help you set your exchange up correctly. And so Baylor University, that's home of the Baylor Bears, and I guess they're having a pretty good football team, good football season this year. So go Bears, I say.
Sick 'em Bears.
Sick 'em Bears. All right, I'm going to kick it back over to you, JC. Let's kind of get going with questions to Craig.
Absolutely, Craig. You know, first of all, Craig, why don't you tell us what is a 1031 exchange?
So a 1031 exchange allows for a taxpayer to sell an asset if they're going to buy another asset. Now, it's often called the like-kind exchange. We'll talk about that a little bit. But it's just a mechanism to allow a taxpayer to sell, followed by a delay period of time and a purchase. And so they don't have to recognize the capital gain that they normally would have to pay taxes on when they sell a property.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big deal. So if you've got some major gains, you've held a property for a few years and you want to sell it, instead of having to pay Uncle Sam a bunch of money, you're telling me that you just exchange it and defer the gains and keep on going with the new property.
Sure. Yeah. The basics is, buy a property for $100. You're going to now sell it for $150. Normally you'd have to pay tax on that $50 of appreciation. And the 1031 allows you to go buy a $150 replacement property and not have to pay taxes on that 50.
Oh, that's great. So tell me, Craig, who can take advantage of a 1031 exchange?
Actually, anybody that is a U.S. taxpayer. So anyone that has to file a U.S. income tax return can take advantage of a 1031 exchange. So literally anybody.
And so what types of properties can be exchanged, Craig?
Well, only real property. So we most commonly understand real property to be land and those things permanently attached to land. But there are some other things that are defined as a real property right. So we actually have people that are selling out of oil and gas royalty interest and purchasing into, multifamily properties or land for land, anything that's a real property right, as long as it's going to be held for investment or productive use in a trade or business. And it's not held, as your primary residence, or it's not held just to flip. So Very broad.
So, I mean, for all the listeners out there, that means that if somebody's got a single family home, let's say in the Bay Area, I live in the Bay Area, and they've got a single family home that's really not worth that much. So that means it's probably worth like $2-3 million. That means that they can take that single family home, if it's a rental, and 1031 exchange it and go buy themselves, let's say, an apartment property in Dallas, Fort Worth, correct?
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
Yes.
That's amazing. So, let's get right down to the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about today, Craig, because I think there's probably a good number of people that understand a 1031 exchange and the value of it. But I think what's really interesting, what we want to talk today about is, let's say that there is a client of yours out there that is in a partnership, let's say like an LLC or something. And they've got, let's say they've got 3, 4, 5 partners, and maybe 1 or 2 of those partners wants to, let's say, cash out and not do the 1031 exchange. But the other 3, let's say, definitely see the advantage of doing a 1031 exchange. So how can somebody actually still successfully execute a 1031 exchange in that particular circumstance?
Okay, so this is an issue that comes up quite often, and there's several potential solutions, and those solutions depend upon how many partners there are, how many want out, whether or not other partners want to exchange. It depends on where you're at in the process. Are you already under contract to sell as the partnership? What's the goal for those that want to do a 1031? What's the goal for how much replacement property they need to buy? So in kind of setting up the scenario, one of the basics of 1031 is you have to reinvest all the cash and offset the debt relief from the sell side. So in our little example we used earlier, you sell for 150, you bought the property for 100. If you have a $40 mortgage on the property, you've got 110 of equity that you're going to have to roll forward to the replacement property. Okay, so we have to keep that in mind, and we have to offset that 40 of debt relief. So when we look at those parameters and how we deal with that, when we have partners that want out, are we going to continue to have to buy that $150 property, or might we be able to reduce it down slightly? Okay, and so let's go to a real simple, basic example of what we can do in this situation. Let's say that we're very early in the process, maybe even before the property is being marketed. There's 3 partners in a partnership. It's an LLC elected to be taxed as a partnership. The property is going to sell for, let's say, $900, and there's a $300 basis. Okay, so a real basic example, no debt. Well, what we might do is A and B. Let's say C wants out, so we've got a 3-partner partnership, and A and B simply source $300 and pay C $300. So now the ABC LLC turns into the AB LLC. Okay, that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly safe. But the result of that is the LLC will still sell the property for $900. And so that means that the LLC now still must purchase a replacement property for $900. In this example, we had no debt. So at closing, $900 of cash into the escrow, $900 of cash out to the qualified intermediary. And now the LLC needs to buy a property for $900 or greater using all of the cash. But that's perfectly safe. There's no tax risk. There's no business risk that's incremental. You still have to find a replacement property within the allotted time frame. But that's a perfectly safe solution to that issue.
Gotcha. So now you've successfully let C get out of the partnership, and A and B have continued on, and they're going to do a 1031 exactly per the regulations.
That's correct. And as to C, C's tax liability for selling the partnership interest is exactly the same as if the ABC LLC had sold and C had his proper amount of gain that he had to recognize. So no difference in tax liability for C in that example.
That makes sense.
Okay. So we can move on to another scenario. That's really just cashing C out with outside money. we could move into a second scenario, and this is one that people have probably heard of before. It has a name given to it just called a drop and swap. And essentially what you're attempting to create, and why I say attempting, is that's the big thing that you have to accomplish, is you need to do this technically correct so that you are accomplishing your goal. And when you take on this structure is critically important, probably even more so important in California than some other parts in the country, because in California, the Franchise Tax Board, which is kind of like the state level equivalent of the Internal Revenue Service, is pretty aggressive on this topic. They want to see, if they find this, they could challenge it if it's not done properly and done far enough in advance. So we're going to assume that we're going to do things at the right time and do them technically correct, so that we don't have any footfalls just on structure of the transaction. And in that particular transaction, what we're trying to do is we're actually going to deed out C's interest, so that C, instead of being a partner, C becomes a tenant in common. So now in our little example, we've got a $900 property, equal owners, 3 equal owners. And so there's going to be a 1/3 undivided fractional interest deeded out of the LLC. So after that step, then you have 2 owners of the property. LLC owns a 2/3 undivided fractional interest. C owns a 1/3 undivided fractional interest, and the 2 are tenants in common. Okay, they want to do that perfectly. They want to take care of any mortgages. They would like to get the lender's approval. They want to act as if they are tenants in common. They want to document everything as tenants in common. They want to enter into the purchase and sell agreement where each is selling their fractional interest. So our assumption for this discussion is that we're going to do things technically correct to mitigate the tax risk. Okay, but the theory then is now you have 2 owners. One owns a $600 undivided fractional interest with a $200 basis, and C owns a $300 fractional interest with a $100 basis. Now, each of those 2 fractional owners at the time of closing are selling their respective property, the fractional interest in the one property. And so now what that means is that the LLC is selling a $600 property, so it need only acquire a $600 or greater replacement property for it to achieve a total deferral. So you go from having to buy a $900 property in our prior example where we just buy C out with outside cash. Now we only have to buy a $600 replacement property for A and B to achieve a total deferral. Now you'll even take C sometimes will even go on to do their own exchange, and they'll go buy something else for $300 themselves.
I mean, that's so great. Now, why wouldn't someone always want to just do the tick structure instead of having to come up with the cash and buy out the other partner?
Sure. So the tenant in common structure can have some difficulties to get to that place where you truly have tenancy in common, as opposed to continuing to act as partners and be deemed to be partners. Just doing the paperwork is not in and of itself enough. You actually need to truly act as tenants in common. And with blanket debt on the property, the debt needs to be allocated proportionately. Bills come in, everything needs to be split proportionately. And you can't do some of the things as tenants in common that you could do as a partnership, have back-end bumps, preferential treatments, those types of things.
Yeah, and I would imagine that also if depending on the type of loan that you've got on the property, you probably are going to have some limitations with your lender. And by the way, all you folks out there, just a heads up, anytime you're going to endeavor to do one of these sorts of deals, you definitely want to check in with your lender way ahead of time and understand what the requirements are in the loan documents to make sure that you're adhering to what the lender is going to require you to do, because most lenders are not going to be okay with you just willy-nilly going and forming a tenants in common, assuming that you need you don't check in with them. You need to make sure that these sorts of things are approved ahead of time. But that could be a difficulty too, is if your lender doesn't allow a tick formation to make this exchange happen.
That's absolutely correct. And you can really cause some problems for yourself if you don't get lender approval, because sometimes loans that have non-recourse status, you can trip into triggering recourse when you do things that violate the loan covenants. So this is very technically precise, and you need good tax counsel to walk you through that when you do the exchange.
I mean, that's great information. So, Craig, what if somebody wants to get a hold of you to talk a little bit more in detail about these sorts of things? How can they get a hold of you?
Sure, a couple of ways. Probably the most efficient way is to shoot me an email, and that's Craig, CRAIG .Brown, just like the color, at IP as in Paul, X1031.com. So Craig.Brown at IPX1031.com. Or my toll-free number is 888-337-1031. That's 888-337-1031, and I'm extension 7.
So some
All right.
great information there, Craig. Is there anything that on the backside of the conversation here, can you give me 2 or 3 things that can screw up a 1031 exchange? And maybe off the top of your head, just give me 2 or 3 things that people have done that you've seen that can cause a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And it fits right into our discussion is if a partnership sells and you simply pay the partner out of the proceeds from the sale. So you sell for $900 and you tell the title company or escrow company, send $600 to my qualified intermediary and $300 to the partnership. Then the partnership has $300 of boot. It gets allocated equally amongst the 3 partners. And so that one partner gets $300 of cash, but only pays taxes on $100, because you can't, under almost all circumstances, you cannot actually allocate that $300 of gain out to that exiting partner. So the A and B that want to do an exchange all of a sudden pay tax liability on money that C's walking away from the table on. So that's a big one. And another big one is you have to have the same taxpayer. Okay, now that's a key phrase, the same taxpayer buy the replacement property. So, Paul, obviously as a lender, you like to make loans to fresh entities, right? Newly formed entities that have no history. And so we may have, LLC1 sell, and we have a requirement because LLC1 is a partnership. It's a regarded taxpayer. It has to buy the replacement property. But you as the lender want a fresh entity to make the loan to. So LLC1 is going to need to set up LLC2, which will be wholly owned by LLC1. LLC2 will borrow the money, take legal title, but for federal income tax purposes, because LLC2 is a disregarded entity, it's as if LLC1 purchased the replacement property. So for federal income tax, you have satisfied the same taxpayer requirement, LLC1 sold, LLC1 purchased, but you've also satisfied the lender requirement of having a special purpose entity to make that loan to. So those are some things that need to be talked about with the lenders up front.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will tell you, Craig is an expert when it comes to the exchanges. And we're talking about, not a couple dollars. We're talking about the savings of tens of millions of dollars that you have the capability of deferring down the road if you make some large purchases in multifamily or retail or office or things like that. I mean, the ability to defer your capital gain farther and farther out is an opportunity to really grow your wealth. And so you really do need to understand some of the rules, and you want to work with experts that Craig is an attorney that specializes in this. You don't want to work with an attorney that only has is a contracts attorney or is an estate planning attorney. Craig is a specialist. Work with specialists when it comes to your money, having the ability to defer it to another transaction. So great information, Craig. We appreciate you coming on. JC, if somebody wanted to get more information about what you do, can you tell us a little bit about what JC and the Multifamily Group does?
Well, Paulie, we've been helping investors for the last 13 years make smart multifamily investment decisions. And our company is a fully integrated syndication company which acquires, renovates, and operates multifamily property, large-scale deals. And one of the interesting things about us is that we've been doing it since before the recession. So we are a full cycle real estate investment company, which is important because we've seen what can go wrong just as much as what can go right. So one thing that I always offer out to any of our viewers out there is we offer a free 50-minute consultation. If you go to our website, multifamilypropertygroup.com, and you go to the Contact Us section, you can request a free 50-minute consultation, and we would be happy to sit down and talk with you for a short minute and figure out if there's anything that we can give you advice on and help you out in terms of your ability to make smart multifamily investments. Ollie, what do you got cooking on your side?
Great information, JC. Nothing. I mean, we just did our conference a couple weeks ago, and we're just coming off the glow of that. And then don't forget oldcapitallending.com or Old Capital Podcast if you want to get updated information about what's going on within the lending industry. I mean, we're trying to do, again, over $1 billion throughout the nation in apartment lending. So we appreciate everybody's support on that one. And again, 1031's very important. If you're thinking about trying to accumulate wealth, you don't want to work with experts on that, setting the table correctly. You don't want to have a knock on your door from the IRS if you try to do it the wrong way. And so Craig Brown at his group they're the best. So go call them, and they'll get you going and give you the straight skinny about what's going to be done. So JC, thanks for putting the podcast together. Craig Brown, thanks for joining us. Again, I'm Paul Peebles. Have a great day.